Hi, if you're following along in the interactive notebook, we're starting on page 15, and we're going to be talking about absolute value and opposites today. So to start off, we're going to write in some notes. So you know that you're being asked to find the absolute value of an integer when it is placed inside the absolute value bars. For example, the absolute value of -7 would be written like this. The absolute value is always a positive number. In parentheses, I'm just going to put the positive sign. So that's not a plus sign, it's a positive sign when we're talking about absolute value. Magnitude is really just another way of saying absolute value. So magnitude is greatness in size or amount. Okay, so now we're going to look and practice right here. Use the number line to find the absolute value, which is the space between the integer and 0 on the number line of the integers below. So it's always a positive number because the absolute value just means the distance or the space between 0 and that integer on the number line. So I'm going to use some colors to kind of, so it won't get overlapped. So for the number 1, the absolute value of +6, I'm just going to shade with my red color pencil here. So whenever you're putting it on the number line, you go to +6 on the number line, and you're just going to count the spaces or the distance between the integer you're working with and 0 on the number line. So for this one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There are 6 spaces between 6 and 0 on the number line. So the absolute value of 6 is 6. 6 spaces. All right, let's do number 2. So this one I'm going to color in green. So we're going to look at the absolute value of -6. So I'm going to go to -6 on the number line, which is here, and I'm going to count the spaces between -6 and 0 on the number line. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so there are 6 spaces between -6 and 0. So the absolute value of -6 is 6. All right, so if you look right here, you have the same distance. One's a positive and one's a negative integer. So these are opposites. Okay, so now let's look at number 3. You have the -14. So the absolute value of -14, I'm going to do this one in blue. I'm going to start over here at -14, and I'm going to count until I get to 0. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. 14 spaces between -14 and 0. So the absolute value of -14 is 14. All right, and then the next one, last one, number 4. So this one is +11. The absolute value of +11. I'm going to do this one in yellow. I'm going to start over here at +11. I'm going to count until I get to 0. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. That's 11 spaces. So the absolute value of 11 is 11. So if you look at your positive examples, 6 and 11, the answer is just itself because it's positive. When you look at the negative integers, -6 and -14, the absolute value is the number itself without the negative. It's that how many spaces it takes to get to 0 on the number line. So that's one way to remember it. Okay, let's move to the next section, which is the bottom. Graph the integers and their opposites. So now we're going to be talking about the opposites on the number lines below. Remember, the integers and their opposites have the same absolute values. Okay, example number 1. Sandy kept track of the weekly low temperature in her town for several weeks. The table shows the low temp in Fahrenheit, degrees Fahrenheit, for each week. So we have week 1 was -1, week 2 was 3, week 3 was -4, and week 4 was 2. So I'm going to just create a really basic number line here. Make sure that I have enough numbers that will cover all of the ones I'm going to be working with. Okay. Okay, that's plenty. Okay, now the first one is going to be, let's see, week 1. So we're going to start with week 1, which is -1. So let me do the color coordinating again. So I'm going to do week 1, okay, in red. So I'm going to start at -1. I'm going to count to get to 0, and that's 1 space. So the integer is -1. The opposite, though, is 1. So if that means if I went to the other side of -1 and the only other integer that is 1 space from 0 would be +1. +1 and -1 are the integers that are opposite because they are the same distance to 0. All right, so the next one, +3 for number 2. So the integer is +3. So I'm going to graph this one in green, and I'm going to go to 3. 1, 2, 3. 3 spaces to get to 0. So the opposite will have to be 3 spaces from 0. 1, 2, 3. That puts me at -3. So the opposite is -3. All right, week 3, we have -4 is our integer. So I'm going to write that here, -4. So I'm going to go to -4 on the number line and count until I get to 0. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's 4 spaces. So that means I have to go 1, 2, 3, 4 to get to the opposite. So the opposite is +4. Last one, for week 4, I'm going to make this one yellow. And the integer is 2. And that comes from right here. So I'm just rewriting it. Now I'm going to go to 2 on the number line, and I'm going to count until I get to 0. 1, 2. It's kind of hard to see. 2 spaces. So then to get the opposite, I'm going to go the opposite. 1, 2. So the opposite is -2. Okay. Hi, this is page 16 in the interactive notebook if you're following along. We're continuing on with our talk about absolute values and opposites, and we're going to add in an element of opposite of the opposite. So that's another standard that we cover when we're talking about absolute values and their opposites. So I color-coded the integers we'll be working with here, and so what we're going to do is we're going to start with the -2 integer, so that's my orange color, and I'm going to find out how many spaces it takes to get from -2 to 0 on the number line. So I start at -2, 1, 2. So to find the opposite, I need to go 2 spaces in the opposite direction, which is to the right. 1, 2. So the opposite of -2 is +2. So the opposite of the opposite would be, well, if it takes 2 spaces to get back to 0, I need to go 2 spaces to go to the opposite. That takes me back to -2. So the opposite of the opposite, which is +2, goes back to -2. So the integer is -2. The opposite is +2. The opposite of this one is -2. All right, let's go on with the second one. So the next one is +9. And that's going to be in green. So I go to +9, and I'm going to count the spaces or find the absolute value of +9. So I'm going to count until I get to 0. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 spaces between +9 and 0. So I'm going to go 9 spaces the opposite way to find the opposite number. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So the opposite of 9 is -9. So the opposite of this opposite goes back to +9. Now, we're going to continue on with our red color, which is -8. So we're going to start at -8, and I need to count the spaces between -8 and 0 on the number line. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 spaces between -8 and 0 on the number line. So I'm trying to find the opposite. So I need to go the opposite direction to find the opposite of -8. So I'm going to count 8 spaces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So the opposite of -8 is +8. So what's the opposite of +8? Well, the opposite goes back to -8. So the opposite of the opposite goes back to the original integer, which is -8. All right, 14. So I have blue for that one. I'm going to go to +14. I'm going to count until I get to the spaces to find my absolute value to get to 0. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So 14 spaces to get from +14 to 0. So now I need to go the opposite way to find the opposite of +14. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. 14 spaces from 0 in the opposite direction takes me to -14, so that is the opposite. And then I remember that the opposite of -14 goes back to +14 because it's the same amount of spaces to 0 but on the opposite side. So the opposite of the opposite is +14. Last one, yellow. So I have the integer is -11. And I'm going to count to see how many units or spaces it takes to get from -11 to 0. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 11 spaces to get from -11 to 0. So now I'm going to go the opposite way to find the opposite integer. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So I land on +11. That is my opposite of -11. So if I'm here, the opposite of the opposite, which is +11, goes back to -11. So the opposite of the opposite is just the original integer. All right, so next part, we have opposite can be displayed using negative signs and parentheses. A negative sign outside the parentheses means opposite. So what is the opposite of 5? Well, how many spaces does it take to get to 0 from the other side? So 5 spaces back from 5 would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the opposite would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. -5. It can also look like this, the opposite of 5, which is -5. What's the opposite of -12? Well, if the absolute value of -12 is 12, then the opposite would be +12. Or it can look like this, the opposite of -12, which is +12. All right, answer the questions below. The opposite of -12 is +12. The opposite of 9 is -9. And the opposite of 64 is -64. How would you write the opposite of 10? Well, I would put 10 in parentheses and put a negative sign to show the opposite of 10.